Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It is me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and we're back this week for an exciting episode of Joe on Joe Illustrated. We're closing into the big finale of the G.I. Joe Marvel run. We're talking about issue 152 today, G.I. Joe 152. It's the 30th anniversary salute, the look back to the origins of General Joe Colton. So exciting. It's a good book. It's a good issue. It's an important issue, especially what it's commemorating and so on and so forth. There's an exciting guest star in it. I can't wait to talk about it. And so, let's jump right in. Psych, before we jump in, we have to get some stuff out of the way. Listeners, thank you so much for helping the show, supporting the show, being awesome on social media. You guys follow me at Joe on Joe Pod. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of the episode. You can also send me an email if you want to be a part of this show. We are about to go into the next phase of this show's existence, and we're talking about You on Joe, where we're doing very private, very personal interviews with private and personal. It's going to be broadcast to everybody, but it's just me and you talking about your specific favorite thing about G.I. Joe. I've recorded the first episode already. The subject is Sergeant Slaughter. I'm excited. I'm playing around with it, trying to do some different stuff with the show's format. That's going to evolve too. I've already got some ideas that I could do things tweak a little different as we go along. So, so it's exciting. It's great because it's just really going to be a focus on some very specific things. And that's what we do on the show. We get into the specifics. Illustrated is all about going page by page, panel by panel. We went episode by episode. So why not go favorite by favorite? So if you want to be a part of that, send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com and let me know if you want to be a guest. If you've been a guest on the show before, I'd love to have you back. I'll certainly be reaching out to some people that I want to have back. It's specifically, but if you guys are listening and you're like, hey man, I really love Dusty. I want to talk about Dusty. Jump in, and jump in before they grab you. So we've got quite a few subjects already grabbed. We've had a couple people double up, but we're going to make it happen. It's going to be fun, and that's going to be the next generation. So we're going to mix it up a little bit. So you can also check me out on the Patreon for the show, which is patreon.com/joeandjoepod. And that is to help to keep the show afloat, help to keep the doors open and all that stuff. And we love it. And the other thing that really helps keep the doors open is our wonderful sponsor podcast, which is the Movies and a Meal.
Listeners, I know what you need in your life. You need more podcasts. And you also love movies. So why not do a podcast that's about not one movie. It's about not two movies. It's about 3 movies and a meal. I'm talking the Movies and a Meal podcast. This show is great. It's brought to you by Keith, Brad, and Ben, and each week they bring a new movie to the table, which they all discuss as a group. And it's not, your highfalutin movies. It's What We Do in the Shadows, The Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and Out of Sight. It's Bad Education, Ghost Rider, and A View to a Kill. It's X-Men Last Stand, Queen Sugar, The Mandalorian, and Major League 2. They are a lot of fun to listen to. You guys know Ben. It's our friend Ben Pensarga. He was a guest on Joe and Joe. In fact, Ben was the very first remote guest that I ever had on this podcast, so he's always got a special place in my heart. I'm really digging this. I just started listening to it last week. It is a lot of fun. They bring a guest in. The guest, I listened to their Heathers episode. They were joined by Kelly, and she went in depth on her favorite movie, which was Heathers, and it made me want to go watch Heathers to watch with them. I really dig it. So guys, find them out there at Movies and a Meal, Twitter, Instagram. Their website is moviesandameal.podbean.com. They put out 1 episode a week. Give them a listen, guys. Support them. Let them know Joe on Joe sent you. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. It is quite entertaining. And now back to the show.
They are awesome. Check them out. Please, please, please. help them grow, to help support this show. All rising tides lifts boats, things like that.
You were saying?
I was, and we are talking about our You Were Saying segment, which is the other comic books that were on the shelves the same month that the issue in question was on the shelf. So G.I. Joe is cover dated September 1994, which in real calendar date is July of 1994. So put your head back. Where were you in July of 94? Were you 10 years old? Were you 20 years old? Were you 50 years old? Were you like, man, were you so excited? Were you 40 years old and excited about celebrating the 30th anniversary of your favorite G.I. Joe guy when you were 10 years old with the 12-inch G.I. Joe back in 1964? And you were like, man, I'm going to go out and see what G.I. Joe's up to lately. And you picked this comic book up off the shelf and it reignited your passion. Like, where were you in July of 1994 when this comic book came out? Because I'll tell you what was on the shelves for Marvel Comics that month. I'll tell you what that was. It was Disney's The Little Mermaid #1. They also did Disney's Beauty and the Beast #1. So there must have been a big Disney push this month. Now remember, for all you youngsters out there, this is before Marvel owned Disney. Disney has a spotty track record with publishing their own comic books. They had been published by Dell and Gladstone, and then they had their own imprint for a little while, and that failed. Like Disney did. For a long time, Disney did a couple things really well, and then they did other things very poorly. And one of them that they did poorly is publishing comic books. And actually, I would say they still kind of don't publish comic books very well either. Marvel certainly publishes good comic books and knows how to do it. But the like Disney branch of comics, they've never really taken off. I'm not talking about like certainly not talking about like how the quality of the comics themselves, like how great Carl Barks comics and stuff were. I'm talking about like in-house publishing, that perspective, that aspect of it. So in this case, Disney, the big mogul company that they weren't publishing their own comics, or at least, with the kind of broad reach that Marvel did. So Marvel took over their line, and they did Beauty and the Beast. They did Little Mermaid. I'm sure they did some more. We'll see if we come across them as we scroll through the page. But yeah, that's something I've always found fascinating about that, is when companies like that who are very successful and really can do everything, at some point they go, nah, it's more cost effective to have someone else do it for us, even though they obviously have the resources for it, like Disney. Like they have Marvel now, and they still publish stuff. Like I think they've been publishing a couple of things through Dark Horse, some like Star Wars stuff and everything. Like it's really peculiar. That behind the scenes stuff I can't really put my finger on, but it's got to be some kind of cost cost ratio thing, like energy to whatever, energy to return. It's got to be some kind of equation that someone in an accounting office dreamt up. Any hoots. Right in the middle of the Phalanx Covenant over in the X books. So this is this is one of the crossovers at the time that would put the big logo on the cover, and it would cross over between all the big X books, like X Factor, X Force, X Men, Uncanny X-Men, and it would in this case say Phalanx Covenant, and then it would, I think there were also versions of this with holograms. The ones I'm looking at, they don't have the holograms. I'm pretty sure there were holograms on the main ones. And then they had in this case, they had images of these characters that were featured. The one has Forge, the one has Siren, and the other one has Synch, S-Y-N-K-H. It's S-Y-N-C-H, sorry, who is a member of the new, at the time, super team Generation X. The Phalanx Covenant was the introduction of Generation X to the world. So what you come out of this is this new super team, which people absolutely loved at the time, and I'm one of them. I thought it was great. It was a real refreshing shot in the arm to the X books. Chris Bachalo did the artwork. It was a going back to their roots, so to speak. Being students at a school. In this case, it was flipped on its head because it was at the Hellions school, where the White Queen, who was still a baddie at the time, she had to train them, and Sean Cassidy Banshee was put in there as a kind of a he was like Xavier's eyes and ears to make sure that everything didn't go poorly. You know, that's what Generation X was. It was the next generation of New Mutants. You know, it was a way to do the New Mutants again without just retreading the New Mutants. I think it worked for a while. Larry Hama certainly had a really excellent long run on it. If you've never read Larry's Generation X books, you really should. Generation X was very cool. I think it was because obviously that name ties it into that night, you know, like the name Gen X really locks it in. I don't know that it'll take a lot to get it to fly. You know what I'm saying? Like where they can publish other books called X-Force and they can do other books called X Factor as team names. But like to have Generation X be the team name, if you call it that now, you're talking about me. You're talking about the adventures of a 47-year-old X-Man. Oh, I'm sorry, but that tickles me. So it's weird. Like one of the most popular books, and it was a really popular book. One of the more popular books of the mid 90s really, as a team, can't be published, really would never, really not be successful anymore, simply because it's called Generation X and it's just tied to that. And there's not much Marvel can do about it. You know, bunch of gray-haired, balding, you know, doughy X-mutants just hanging out, complaining about video games and complaining about the state of comic books today. That would be the Generation X comic book today. But X-Men Phalanx Covenant, the Phalanx Covenant is a very fun crossover. It deals with, you know, the Phalanx, which is Warlock, who is that black and yellow, really oddball looking robot life form that the brilliant Bill Sienkiewicz designed and created. And, you know, he had that techno-organic virus. So it was about his species coming to Earth and trying to take over Earth and all that stuff. So, and that was called the Phalanx. So, or an offshoot of his species called the Phalanx. Something to do with the transmode virus. Yeah. So there you go. So yeah, Phalanx Covenant is fun, and Generation X, doubtful we'll get another successful. I'm sure it'll be revisited. They'll do miniseries and stuff, but I doubt it'll be a functional team name just because yeah. Anyway, that's fun. We got books like Morbius is on issue number 25. Namor, the Submariner. This is the book that John Byrne relaunched, you know, a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years earlier. It's on issue number 54. New Warriors is on issue number 51. Night Thrasher, the ongoing Night Thrasher series, is on issue 14. Punisher has Punisher 2099, issue 20. Punisher number 94. Punisher War Journal number 70. It's got an annual out this summer. It's got War Zone number 31. Punisher's, you know, he's all over the place. Yeah, there's a lot of like mid-level books. Ghost Rider 2099, Galactic Guardians, which was the spin-off of, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, Force Works, we talked about that last week. Black Cat has a mini-series, issue number 3. Fantastic Four Unlimited is out. I've talked about that before. Doom 2099. Like, you know, none of these are really, you know, Coneheads is finally up to issue number 4. You know, Black Wolf with the WULF is on issue number 4. This one's interesting, actually. Blade the Vampire Hunter. This, I don't know if this is, I think this might be Blade Volume 1 or maybe Volume 2, or if it's basically Blade has had a million miniseries. This is the least popular one, therefore this is one of the more expensive ones to get in back issues. That's what I'm trying to say. It's the one where the cover, the logo is almost hand drawn as if you were dipping a quill, and I think this is the effect they were going for, a quill pen in blood or something, and writing the word Blade. And then it says the Vampire Hunter. And I think the actual Indicia name is Blade the Vampire Hunter, where other series of his were just called Blade. I believe this is the series that's hard to find as back issues. Not saying that they'll never reprint this. Certainly, probably everything will be back in print soon. So I wouldn't say run out and spend a lot of money on them. But if you have them in your collection, you might want to flip them. You might want to flip them and get a couple bucks for them right now, because I have a feeling they'll be doing like a Blade omnibus if they haven't already, and that would certainly include this series, which is okay. I've read it; it's decent. It's not terrible.
You were saying,
especially for 90s Marvel at the time. So now we're going to look over at DC comic books, and this is cover dated September of 1994, and we're going to see what's going on. Now, the biggest thing going on at DC this month is the start of Zero Hour. If you uninitiated, what Zero Hour was their attempt to clean up the mess that came out of 1986's Crisis on Infinite Earths. So here we are 9 years later, and they realized that they had a huge mess on their hands, an absolute huge mess on their hands, because a lot of the continuity got screwed up, not necessarily with your big hitters like Batman and even Superman, really. That was really clean when they redid him with Byrne. There were a few hangers on. One of the notable ones, though, with that was Legion of Superheroes. So they had to clean up the Legion of Superhero continuity. The other thing, because Superman was never Superboy, and Superboy inspired the Legion, so that was always a problem. They also dropped the ball with Hawkman, wherein they did Hawkworld, and it seemingly was set kind of in the past, and then they brought it to the present, and all of a sudden it meant all the previous Hawkman adventures didn't exist, because the characters of Hawkman from Hawkworld absolutely was not the same character that had been in previous adventures with even recent adventures, like from 1987 Justice League stuff. That Hawkworld version was not the same Hawkman. So they had to kind of clean that up. And there were some other loose ends too, that they just looked around the company and said, well, let's do this Zero Hour where we can kind of give a fresh, little soft reboot and fix a few characters and introduce new characters and so on and so forth. So you've got a lot of books with the 0 hour indicia over the top. We've got Shadow the Bat 31. We've got Batman number 511. Superman, or Action Comics rather, 703. Superman, Adventures of Superman 516. Who else is Damage? That character Damage is number 6, issue number 6, which Damage would go on to be Atom Smasher in the Black Adam movie. Flash number 94 is a 0 hour tie-in. Batman 678, Green Arrow 90, Green Lantern 55, and the tie-ins here were 0 hour started with a character called, if I scroll all the way down here, it should be 0 hour issue number 0. Oh yeah, so they came out weekly. And issue 4 came out first. And it's a red-gloved hand holding the hood, of the empty hood of a Flash. And Crisis, Flash, Barry Allen died in the Crisis, so this is an ominous time for Flash. Someone's car alarm is going off. An ominous time for stealing cars. Holy cow, that honking went on way too long. For real, people. Sorry about that. Yeah, so 0 hour was great. It's for like a resetter thing. I've actually reread it recently. And yeah, it's only 5 issues. So it really works as an addendum to Crisis. It's not a super meaty story like I feel Crisis was. It's well executed, certainly. The art's great. The story they tell is pretty great, but it starts with a villain called Extant running through, like he's going to wipe out time, whatever, and you don't know who it is. And it turns out that's actually bad guy Hal Jordan. And there's a reveal there, and then I think they ended up making Extant someone else because they wanted to use the character. But then anyway, but the end result here is you do get a lot of new characters introduced. Starman being the best one that came out of 0 hour, which is great. And you get a lot of focus on a lot of the new characters like the Ray, the young Superboy Impulse. He's a big player in this. And then they relaunched the series, and they used it to close out series like Legion, and not necessarily not close out, but like relaunch Legion of Superheroes. They did a cool bit up in Legion 61, which is out this month, where they revealed that at least in this iteration, and because technically this is post-Crisis, so in the version of reality post-Crisis, pre-0 hour, the time trapper the whole time was Cosmic Boy, Rock Kryn. It was awesome. And then in Legionnaires 18, you have all the Legionnaires meeting up with their their time tossed selves and stuff. And the Legion story ended really nicely because as the world wiped out, the three founders reconciled with the three clone versions, the younger versions of themselves, and they all stepped into it together. And then when you revisit it after 0 Hour, the storyline just kind of picked up clean and fresh, and there was one set. So this and that concept of giving books the ability to kind of wipe your slate clean, tell the story you want to tell without a lot of that baggage. Hawkman, we're looking at you. That it was used to good effect, and it worked pretty well, and it was a fun adventure. And then of course that didn't last. Maybe 10 years until they had to come back and do Infinite Crisis. I feel like Infinite Crisis was right around like 2005, maybe. And it wasn't there. There was another one after 0 Hour too. Well, they did with DC 1 Million. I feel like after 0 Hour, it just went into. Anyway, that's for another time. But 0 Hour is happening this month, which is huge. It's just huge. DC's rebooting they're rebooting their Fang. And so that works really well. And so I'm just scrolling through here. Notable fun covers. There's the Robin. You have Tim Drake Robin, who's the star of this series, but he's teamed up with Dick Grayson Robin in this book, right? Because time is bending and everything. You have in Superboy, which is the Connor Kent version of Superboy, the clone Superboy, he's fighting young Superboy, Superman Superboy. Team Titans, they're fighting a bunch of dinosaurs. It's a fun time, and good. I enjoy it. Yeah, Hawkman is on issue 13. That book really got a lot of cleanup from 0 Hour. So yeah. Oh, and you've got the new Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner teamed up with Alan Scott from the Justice Society Green Lantern. So yeah, I like 0 Hour. I thought it got forgotten for a long time. They did a reboot of it recently, a new trade of it recently. I don't think it sold gangbusters because I still think it's considered kind of the forgotten, because it is kind of just a cleanup addendum. Oh, and one more thing this month out of DC Comics is Aquaman #2. We talked about this last month. This is the Peter David Aquaman series, which is really, really great. This is the issue that Aquaman gets his hand eaten off. I believe it's the last page. He pulls his hand up out of the water. Spoiler alert. And it's just bones because the piranhas have eaten it all. So too bad, Aquaman.
You were saying?
Now, this book came out in the month of July 1994. I was home from college, sweating out all the beer, getting ready for sophomore year. And on the big screen, the kind of crazy movie, kind of insane movie, Blown Away, with Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones. And Tommy Lee Jones is the Irish bomber. Jeff Bridges is the Irish, ex-IRA bomber. Now, I forget if he was a cop living in. He was a bomb expert, but I think he was an actual cop in America, but he used to work with the IRA back home in Ireland during the Troubles. And I rewatched this recently. It's pretty good. It really does hold up, but it's crazy. Tommy Lee Jones is unhinged in it. That's on July 1st. The other really big movie on July 1st, of course, is Baby's Day Out. No, it is out, but that's not the movie I'm talking about. The Shadow with Alec Baldwin, Penelope Ann Miller. Now, Batman happened, and every comic book movie wanted to emulate Batman. Every comic book TV show wanted to emulate Batman. Flash, Dick Tracy certainly was pulling from the Batman thing. There were so many, and The Shadow is certainly one of them. Did we cover The Phantom already? That was pulling from some of the Batman stuff. When I say pulling from, I'm talking about the overall mood, theme, score, that kind of stuff, not not actual stories or anything. So The Shadow comes along, and Alec Baldwin plays The Shadow. It's not great. It's not terrible. Lamont Cranston. I like that they gave him the fake nose when he became the Shadow and didn't bother explaining it. Just said that's what the Shadow looks like. I thought that was cool. It's okay. it was, yeah, it's okay. I just don't know if I don't know if the world wants the Shadow. Yeah. I like the Shadow. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the comic series. But, you know, but I'll tell you what, though, that movie's absolutely going to be in the shadow of the movie that came out 5 days later on the 6th of July, Forrest Gump. Stop it. I loved this movie. I saw this movie probably 4 times in the theater. It still works for me. I know it's got, pretty conservative and like, kind of like not so much conservative, but like experimenting, like testing out the boundaries of life is bad kind of moral lessons in it. But you know what? I don't care. It's so well done. It's so entertaining. It moves at a really good clip. The score, like the music in it is fabulous. Zemeckis did it, especially for effects at the time. The effects are really amazing, as far as getting Tom Hanks into all those places. I still love Forrest Gump. I think it totally works. It does kind of, Jenny gets punished just because she wants to, or, because she leads an unorthodox life. And that's a little like, well, I don't know about that. But, it works. I like Forrest Gump. It works. So then, let's see. So a lot of times when they do those big movies, they take a week off. So on the 13th, which would have been 7 days later, nothing came out except a re-release of Dr. Strangelove, which is brilliant, of course. And then on July 15th, True Lies came out. So True Lies gave Forrest Gump like 10 days before it whipped its own self out and put it on the table. Because True Lies is awesome. True Lies is great. I love True Lies. Like, it's so good. It's Tom Arnold is brilliant in it. He's a little kooky, but he is brilliant in that movie. Everyone's great in it. Bill Paxton, Tia Carrere, Jamie Lee Curtis. Arnold's really good in it. A baby girl, Eliza Dushku's in it as Arnold's daughter. I mean, Charlton Heston shows up. Love Charlton Heston. It's great. True Lies holds up. True Lies always holds up. It's really, really solid. 5 days later, on the 20th, is The Client. This is the Joel Schumacher adaptation of the John Grisham novel. And this has got Tommy Lee Jones, speaking of cuckoo, Susan Sarandon, and what's his name? Doesn't it have the little kid from... it's got Brad Renfro. That's who's the young kid. Yeah, rest in peace, Brad Renfro. So The Client, that was a big hit. July 22nd. Oh, the Lassie remake. I've never seen that. Now we got a real massive hit. No, this movie tanked terribly. It's called North. It's by Rob Reiner, who I enjoy his films typically. North is not good. It's about Elijah Wood, who's a 9-year-old kid who wants to divorce his parents, and he travels the world to find a pair of parents that suits him the best, like the perfect parents. It's not great. It's not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great. The 29th of July. Jim Carrey's The Mask came out the 29th that month. That was a big hit. I've never loved this movie. Also takes a lot of the visual cues from both Dick Tracy and Batman. I've never loved this movie, but I know it was a huge hit. I know it's got its devotees. I like the comic. Comic's a lot of fun. Jim Carrey was really great as The Mask. He really was. That's perfect for his comedy. I don't love his comedy. Like, in that case, he's being taken over by the Loki mask. And so he's like this human cartoon. I think that works great for that. When he's just doing that as just a normal human being, that always bugs me. I'm not a massive fan of that, although I like Jim Carrey. So there's some big movies in July of 1994.
Now, mass is ready.
All right, and here we go. G.I. Joe, number 152. I've got a fun cover. Phil Gosher and Scott Koblish. And they signed this cover March 1993. So they drew this in March of 1993. Can that be true? Could this, our dates are correct. I know we're, as far as what's out and everything, It's September 1994. So they really did this cover that far in advance? That's amazing. That's I wonder, did they get the year wrong? I mean, that seems, that's why. I mean, you know, listen, comics are produced well in advance. I get it. But that's a lot. Either way, it's a great cover. Don't get me wrong. It's a really, really great cover. You've got G.I. Joe, the original G.I. Joe, the 1964 G.I. Joe. He's standing with the American flag on the cover. There's some soldiers behind him. He's standing on like some rubble from a war, and and he's holding the American flag up. And then there's there's a square like inset that says 30th Salute G.I. Joe with the old logo, G.I. Joe 1964, 1994. The real logo, the comic book logo, G.I. Joe, is still on the book and in its normal indicia. I'm going to throw this out there, and I wonder what this would have meant for copyright purposes. So maybe there's a reason they don't do that, but I would have liked to have seen the real G.I. Joe logo just be the retro G.I. Joe logo. So it would have said, instead of saying G.I. Joe Real American Hero, it would have just said G.I. Joe, like just instead of doing the inset, just do that as the cover. Still all the stuff saying 152 and everything. I think that would have been a fun variation on this. But it's good. It's got, smoke effects in the back. I think the colors on this cover really work well. Nice shading, nice shadow work with the Joe casting the shadow on the American flag. I think that works. I think and it stands out as different from the other covers that they were doing at the time. It really does stand out as kind of a timeless cover. It's also, I should mention, it's got an indicia in the middle that says in a burst, like a starburst, it says special issue presenting the original adventure of the very first G.I. Joe.
Yo, Joe!
It's called Just Fade Away. Script by Larry Hama. Pencils by Phil Gosier. Inks by the great Scott Koblish. Colors by Shy. Letters by Vic. Editor Mike Lackey and editor-in-chief Tom DeFalco. And, what's interesting about this book is there's very little about this that brands it a real American hero, G.I. Joe. So I'd be curious as to the origins of this book, especially if that cover is... I'm having a thought here. Hold on one second. I'm going to pause this. Yeah. Okay. So there's only 16 pages to this comic book. There's nothing about this comic book that brands it as actual G.I. Joe Real American Hero. They're not flying a Sky Striker. The closest you get is there is a helicopter on the very last page that might be a Tomahawk, but it's really not a Tomahawk at all. You have a cover that's dated March of a year prior, so it's not even March of the same year. I would bet you this comic book itself was created possibly as an insert to go with something else or some other promotional tie-in. I'm willing to bet that there's something along those lines here, and then they repurposed it to use here because it's too short, doesn't have any of the G.I. Joes in it. Joe Colton doesn't look anything like he looks in the series. Ace doesn't look anything like he looks in. They call him Ace, but that's not Ace. Ace is not flying a Sky Striker. There's I'd be willing to bet that's the origins of this actual story, is that this was put together for something else. I do not, anything else beyond that would be speculation, but using all these clues and just, there's no Cobra, there's no G.I. Joe, there's no blah blah. That's what this was. Maybe it was supposed to be packaged with action figures, and then when they kind of got to the point here of they're running out the clock for the comic book, they said let's just publish it there. But yeah, so that's the hill I'm going to die on in this one, kids. So we give this opening scene. We have two guys getting into an airplane, And we have the dialogue saying, "I almost didn't recognize you without the beard, General Colton." And it's a great way to phrase it. Larry says it's impossible to get a good seal on the oxygen mask with chin fuzz because they're going supersonic. And that's when the guy who's identified as Joe Colton, but doesn't look like Joe Colton, says, "You can dispense with serving me, Ace. Up until they recalled me to active duty, I was just another guy named Joe." So this is quote unquote Ace, and we're getting into somebody's plane, but it's no G.I. Joe plane. That's for sure.
Yo, Joe!
And that's what you see in this next panel. You see that they're in a, I believe they call it an X-16, and they're getting commands. You know that they're doing the air check. Their fuel's pressure is stable. Their nav and comm systems are on. Their hydraulics and electrics are working, so on and so forth. They're cleared to taxi. They give the little Roger to the tower. And they take off, and it's good. It's a standard, like check your, put your boarding trays up. We're getting ready to take off kind of a scene, but it works well. And I like the level of detail that they've given it, both in the dialogue and in the background. They flesh out the airbase that they're at. The airplane looks great. I love the angle that they drew for this X-16 taking off at the bottom. They kind of cocked it at an angle. It really kind of makes the page move when it really is not much action going on because it's just them sitting in the cockpit for most of the page. And we see that the brass hats in DC are in a rush because that's why they're taking this jet. So they're going to be flying from, they're going to DC, but I don't know wherever they're at. They're in McGuire, New Jersey. So they're just flying from New Jersey to DC. So they're just going to go psh, psh.
Yo, Joe!
Which should be pretty quick. And it is about the time of the story. Like they get there and they land pretty fast. So they're burning a lot of jet fuel for it. So now the plane's up in the air and Joe has a little bit of air sickness. And then we get into what the meat of the story is. And he says, the last time I rode in the backseat of a combat jet was in 1963. And it was an F-4 Phantom. And now we're back in Vietnam. It's the early days of Vietnam. And he says that he rode that Phantom almost nonstop from Tonson Hut to Andrews. And according to Ace here, flying an F-4 would have taken about 4 or 5 refuelings along the way. And to go that fast and that quickly, what was so important? And we're going to find out what was so important. I think maybe you guys could guess. But he says, well, this doesn't make any sense. He says, I can't tell you. It's still classified top secret. But then he proceeds to tell us the story. So let's put a pin in the top secret thing till we get to the end. So now we get some adventures, and it's Joe in the Vietnam War. And it's similar to, I'm getting vibes of Snake Eyes. But now Snake Eyes, we know, based on the timeline, was probably 10 years later. So Snake Eyes is probably about 10 years younger than Joe Colton, maybe 15 if Colton was already a bit of a vet when he was over in Vietnam. So it's Joe Colton fighting, and he's next to one of his compadres named Angel. And let's see, who is it? Sergeant Wenzel and Angel Vasquez. So there's 3 people of his group that are still alive, and then they had some locals that were working with them. They call them indigs, which are like indigenous people. And really, they're only here for cannon fodder.
Yo, Joe!
I love the detail, the rendering on these pages was really great. There's a lot of, I'll say this, there's a lot of open mouth screamy faces, which you guys know I'm not a massive fan of, but it's of the era, so I get it. But the craftsmanship on a lot of the anatomy and detail work on where the light sources are, because they're fighting in the dark in the jungle, and light sources being the barrels of the gun. I think that works really well on these pages. So Joe Colton calls for an extraction. Whoever that one guy is, who was that? Is that Wenzel or Vasquez? I think that's Angel Vasquez. He's calling for it. And one of the indigenous people gets just blown away. That's he doesn't have a good day in that second panel. But then Colton goes ham, and he tells Top to haul Vasquez and the Indigs to the LZ. So maybe it was Vasquez. Actually, it was Vasquez who took the shot in the chest. And they apparently left the ammo dumper rigged with C4. So he's going to go blow it so that they can't get access to all that weapon.
Yo, Joe!
So his job was to look out for his command, and he blew it. I guess he was trying to redeem himself by giving the others a chance at an extraction. So Joe Colton is going to head in, distract the Viet Cong, while his friends who are wounded make their way out. He dives into the bunker, and he runs right into a Viet Cong sapper who's already there, and this guy's actually disconnecting the explosives because they're going to then use all these explosives and ammunition for their own fight. So that's the one thing that Joe does not want to happen. He doesn't want to, leave behind stuff that could be used to kill his own troops, and that makes total sense. So it's a bit of a standoff. Colton's got his M16 trained at the guy, and the guy's got his hand on the snipping. He's got his snipping tools on the wires that cut to the explosives. He says, and this is great writing. Actually, this whole thing's written really well by Larry. Kudos to him. He says, talking about this Viet Cong guy, he says he had made the decision to save the munitions for his unit at the cost of his own life. It wasn't a malicious smile. It was the smile of one who had seen the white light in the eyes of the angel of death and has been rendered fearless by it. So the guy knows that if he snips this wire, Colton's going to shoot him and kill him. But if he doesn't snip the wire, then Colton's going to blow up not only the munitions, but probably this guy's buddies too.
Yo, Joe!
And so he snips the wires and Colton shoots him. But then 3 other guys come on down. And that's when Colton, he takes out one of them, but then his gun jams. And he gets into a fist fight, gun butt to face kind of a fight. And he pulls his pistol. And this is a lot of that Larry Hama detail of writing, which I think we all enjoy. I think that's one of the things we really enjoy about his work, where Larry just puts out details of someone who knows what he's talking about and does the work and puts it in there. So he says, I put a burst through the center mass of the first one, and then my Mike 1.6 decided to choke on a bulged case. Had to vertical butt stroke number two while I pulled the old model 1911 A1 on the third VC, Viet Cong. I had violated the standard operating procedure, the SOP, by carrying that old Colt locked and cocked. So in other words, he kept a round in the chamber, which is against standard procedures because it's not super safe. But he says, good thing, in the time it would have taken to work the slide, which means, slide the chamber back, slide the chamber back and slide the barrel back. Oh man, it's been a long time since I've handled guns. I used to have I got my Ford card when I was 10 years old, and put a round in the chamber, worked the slide and put a round in the chamber. I would have had a face full of machete. Such are the fortunes of war. Like that's a really well written page. It's a wonderfully illustrated page. You follow the action really well, and then you get to the end, and you have some dead bodies, and that's the rigors of war and whatnot.
Yo, Joe!
So now, as he's exiting the compound, he just tosses a grenade behind him, and that's not the ideal. Ideally, with the timer, the wired explosives, you could get far enough away before the explosives go off. But in this case, because he had to toss a grenade, it makes him pretty deaf. So his ears are like cotton, full of cotton, and a freight train was rolling through his head, and he's cutting through the cutting through the jungle, rather. But he also realizes he can't go directly to where he knows his friends are at. He has to cut another direction so as to not lead the enemy towards his friends. And they're heading towards a landing zone. They think they said earlier was like 5 clicks away, like over a mountain.
Yo, Joe!
And as Colton reaches that, it's right as the helicopter's reaching the landing zone. His friends give him a kind of a fun like security check. They're like, "Who won the pennant in '45?" And his response is, "What?" And he's about to say, "Kiss my butt," and then they just say, "All right, yeah, come on." But what none of them are doing, none of them are looking the tree line for other enemy. and there's a bunch of Viet Cong in the tree line with anti-aircraft guns. So Colton really takes this personally. He says, I should have spotted those two 12-7 Mikes. I didn't, and the crew of the Huey paid the price. And yeah, the Huey gets blowed up real good and crashes and whatnot. But his dudes were there first. His dudes were not only there first, they were there probably for, we'll say, an hour before he got there, I would imagine. Maybe a half hour at the least. I feel like it was a group letdown there.
Yo, Joe!
Don't beat yourself up, Joe Colton. So now we've got Colton. Oh, so it's everyone's still around. So it's Colton and oh no, that dude got hit too. So I'm not exactly sure who everybody is here, but it's Colton and it's two guys are fighting back to back, and one of his guys gets shot. And I think that's Angelo. But as they're and they also say that we're SOOL, and that's according to Mike, he says it's simply out of luck, which is great because that's not what the S stands for. But they think they're screwed because they say that they've got a company-size elements, highly motivated farmers coming up the far side of the mountain, and a half battalion moving up from the Ville side. So these three army guys, army soldiers, are dead meat. But at that moment, a completely clad in black shadow helicopter comes roaring in, firing missiles.
Yo, Joe!
Like something out of a movie. Lands, and basically they're like, we don't care who this is, get on it and let's go. And as soon as they jump into the helicopter, as Larry puts it, the flight went through pitch as soon as we hit his deck plates. That's a pretty great way to phrase it. So they're getting away, and Colton's got his buddy's gut shot, so he's like, we got to get to the nearest surgical facility. The pilot says, no can do. I've got orders to, so high up, you got to salute it twice to take one Joseph Colton straight to Tonsenhut. And then that's when Joe Colton pulls a gun on the pilot here. And he says, you put us down at the nearest camp. And the pilot says, go ahead and shoot. He says, I follow my orders, Lieutenant. Maybe you'd better think about following yours. You've got orders from way up the chain of command to report to Washington. I'm just the chauffeur. Do you copy that? I'll call ahead and have a surgeon ready, but this is what we're doing.
Yo, Joe!
There's a big part of me that wanted this to be a 21-year-old Wild Bill. There's a real big part of me that wanted this to be Wild Bill. There's no indication that it is, but there's everything in me, my person, wanted this to be Wild Bill. But I don't see anywhere that it says that it is. And in fact, the other trooper, that Locke guy or Top guy or whatever, says the Rotor Jock's a hard case. He's got Langley, CIA written all over him. And then he points out that, look at the helicopter with the bird we're in. It's a mystery plane. Something's weird going on. So they're holding on to Angel. Angel's slowly dying. And it's that classic, do you remember the rabbits, George? Tell me, moment where he's dying in his hands, and he's asking. It's actually a really nice thing. I don't mean to belittle it, but basically, Angel points out. Do you remember we were at that one base, and he says there was the chopper. All the bodies kept coming in, and they were on the tarmac, and they were laying in a row like chorizos in a bodega. And he says, remember, they had covered the bodies with ponchos, and every time another chopper came in, the ponchos would blow off, and you would just constantly be exposing these dead soldiers to wind, the elements, not with the dignity of death. And she says, as he's laying there dying, he says, just don't let that happen to me.
Yo, Joe!
Which is a lovely scene to write, Larry. It's a lovely, lovely scene. And sure enough, plane lands, and they're there, and they're like, hey, you guys called for a medic, and he says, don't worry about it. He died an hour ago. I'm taking the soldier directly to the grave registration myself, and I'm going to stand there until I see him put into a box. Special Forces takes care of their own, and the other guy pulls a gun on the MP who's trying to get Colton to jump into that F4, and he just says, you let the young lieutenant do what he has to do.
Yo, Joe!
And so now we cut, and it's the it's the White House. And so he's standing there, and it's like 36 hours later. Yeah, 36 hours ago, he says, I was squatting on a straw mat eating monkey meat on a stick. So this is actually it took less than 36 hours to get home. Like that was a day and a half ago before they got ambushed. So he's cleaned up. He's in his uniform. He's waiting for the president. And the first glimpse that you're going to get of what you're in for here is he says, is this a model of the PT-109? And that should, raise a flag for any of you history buffs. He says, I read about this. He was a skipper on this little boat. And, and it got sliced in half by a Japanese destroyer, etc. And then you get a word balloon from out of nowhere. And this is a classic way to introduce someone in a comic book. Really great storytelling here. The word bubble the dialogue precedes the character because it sets you up for an expectation, and there's clues as to who the character is. Yo, Joe! And then now you get a quarter-page panel of President John F. Kennedy. It's a pretty good rendition. So it's this big reveal of here's JFK, and he says, welcome, sit down, blah, blah, blah. They talk a little bit about 109, and they talk about responsibility, and he says, I have authorizations for the formation of a new Army unit, a unit that bypasses the regular chain of command and answers directly to this office. He says, not an elitist Praetorian Guard, but a cadre of knights errant, fit for a modern Camelot, steeped in egalitarian ideals and wholly dedicated to the cause of freedom. And he identifies Joe Colton as someone who, honesty and the fervor of youth and the courage to always attempt to do the right thing. I think you're the right man for this job, Lieutenant Colton. And he's holding a folder that on it is stamped G.I. Joe. Yo, Joe! Which Colton repeats. And Kennedy says, that's the temporary code name. We're trying to be pretty low-key on this. And he goes, Thanksgiving is this coming Thursday. Why don't you take some leave time, go home and spend the holidays with the family? You can give me your answer then. Now, the guy pops in and says, we have to go to the airport. We have a busy schedule in Texas this week. We have to be in Dallas by the 22nd. So if it's this week and they're in Dallas, then this date is happening. Dallas 22nd is when he was assassinated. So we're roughly looking at, this is probably November 15th, maybe November 16th. It's 1963 when this is all going down. And JFK gets Colton to promise to think about it. Your country's counting on you. So Colton doesn't commit to it right away. But Yo, Joe! As they're landing, as they're heading into Edwards Air Force Base, we're now back in the modern times, and they're actually flying over Arlington National Cemetery, so reminded of all the soldiers that have gone before him. And remember, this was all still in his brain. He wasn't really telling Ace this story. This was the stuff he was thinking about. And Ace says, "You all right, sir?" And he says, "No, I'm fine. Just give me a minute, please, and thank you." And so the plane opens up, the canopy opens up, and he gets out at Edwards Air Force Base, and presuming to go meet with somebody. So that's it. That's it. That's the adventure. I like it. It's good. As I said earlier, I don't think it was meant for this. And also, I don't know why that's a top secret story, because if he's talking to Ace, he's talking to a member of the G.I. Joe team. That's Ace. So what's the deal? What's top secret about I talked to JFK and JFK started this program? That's pretty cool. I feel like that's a weird, anyway. But it works. The story works. So don't get it twisted. The story works really well. It's a cool origin. It's a great way to tie in the original G.I. Joe toy into real American hero stuff. But yeah, I get the vibe. There's a lot of signs pointing that this was not meant to be where that story was supposed to be published. Postbox from the Pit. We've got letters here from George Hurd out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Ben Herman out of Scarsdale, New York. Joe Kaczarski the third out of Haddington Heights, New Jersey. Mike O'Sullivan out of Loomis, California. Jeff Britton out of New York, New York. Andrew Fix out of Moses Lake, Washington. And then we get a tease. Next issue, Scarlet stands alone against the ultimate in Cobra weapons technology. Guest writer Peter Quinones and artist William Rosado, I love Will Rosado, and guest inker Jack Snyder put you squarely in the shadow of the bat. So, and then we get Duke. We get a multiple pages of images and pinup photos, rather. So it's Alex Saviuk giving us an awesome Duke, a really shirtless, would be very much at home in G.I. Joe Extreme Duke. We also get Stalker, a nice Stalker, heavily shadowed. I like the effect of the of his shotgun in his left hand popping out of the jungle. That's pretty good. Rock and Roll by Scott Kobish did the inks and Evans did the pencils. A nice Rock and Roll, and this is the V2 where he's got those the underarm Gatling guns and some random girl that he's protecting. I don't know who that's supposed to be. Maybe CoverGirl, maybe. Storm Shadow by the great Ernie Chan. I don't remember this photo at all. That's fabulous. Ernie Chan's a legend, man. That's awesome. So, and this V2 Storm Shadow fighting some red ninjas. Then we've got Scarlet in her ninja gear, in her ninja outfit, which is not great. And then we've got Phil Gosher doing that most recent version of Snake Eyes, where it's just kind of a gray bodysuit. Not my favorite rendition of Snake Eyes, but it's a fun, bloody photo. Snake Eyes has murdered a lot of vipers and even has blood on his sickle, which is very exciting. So that's it. That's it for G.I. Joe 152, man. That's, yeah, so I don't know. Does anyone know? Does anyone know the details on this? I have someone I might be able to reach out to and find out the answer to what this originally was intended for. My guess is, honestly, it was supposed to be an insert with a toy. And that they were putting it together to go with a toy. Or it was supposed to be a backup drawer, like a backup drawer book, right? Because they did, they would have backup stories ready to go in case a book was delayed. And they only did 16 pages because they knew they would do 6 pages of wraparound, like 3 in the front and 3 in the back, right? And the wraparound would context it into whenever they used it in the modern continuity. And then in this case, they said, well, let's not bother doing it, but let's use this inventory issue. Let's get this, something along those lines. I'm not sure. That's 100% speculation. But I definitely know something was up. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did, because I certainly did. And now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.